Lewis Hamilton crossed the line on the podium at his home race. The crowd was still roaring. And then the stewards summoned him. In that 10-minute wait, before anyone knew the verdict, something became painfully clear about the team he left Mercedes to join, the team he was supposed to win championships with. Let's go back to the beginning of the weekend, because none of what happened on Sunday makes sense without it. Silverstone was supposed to be the moment everything clicked for Hamilton and Ferrari. From the moment Friday practice ended, he was the fastest man on track. In sprint qualifying, he topped every single segment, and in the final one-lap shootout, he beat Kimi Antonelli by just 11 thousandths of a second, a margin so small it barely registers as a gap at all. He spoke afterward about what it meant to him personally, about building up to this race all week, thinking through every corner, feeling like the car and the team behind him were finally working in harmony. For a few hours, on a Friday afternoon in front of his own fans, it looked Ferrari's long wait for a genuine title contender was finally over. But that wasn't the story that ended up defining the weekend. Not even close. Saturday's sprint itself was a preview of exactly how fragile that feeling was. Antonelli passed him easily on the run down to Stowe, Hamilton later admitting he was powerless to stop it. The move completed halfway down the straight before he could even react. It wasn't the duel he wanted in front of his own crowd. For the rest of the sprint he was locked in a battle just to break even a single-second gap to the Mercedes ahead, and he never managed it. Ferrari left Silverstone Saturday with a pole position trophy and a warning sign nobody wanted to talk about out loud. Then came Sunday, and the Grand Prix itself, where the real trouble started. Hamilton jumped the start. A 5-second penalty was handed down almost immediately, and Ferrari made the call to absorb it during his first scheduled pit stop rather than let it hang over the race as a slow-burning threat. On paper, that is textbook strategy, clean and professional, the kind of call that gets praised in a debrief. In practice, it was only the first crack in what was about to become a far messier afternoon for the team. Here is what most fans watching the race highlights completely missed. The real damage to Hamilton's race wasn't those 5 seconds. It was what happened much later, when Max Verstappen's Red Bull speared off into the gravel on lap 48 of 52, triggering a safety car that reshuffled the entire top of the field in an instant. Every strategist on every pit wall suddenly had a split-second decision to make. Stay out and gamble on track position with old tires, or pit for the guarantee of fresh rubber and hope the order sorts itself out later. Mercedes, running just behind Hamilton at the time, chose to leave George Russell exactly where he was, out on track, doing nothing, betting that track position alone would be worth more than fresher tires in a race that was about to finish under caution anyway. Ferrari brought Hamilton in. That single call cost him second place outright. Russell inherited the position simply by staying put while Hamilton's Ferrari rejoined further back in the queue. And this is the part that should genuinely concern anyone who supports this team. Hamilton himself admitted afterward that the entire sequence felt like a blur to him in the moment, telling reporters plainly that he was running in second, and then suddenly they pitted. Not a detailed tactical explanation. Not a considered breakdown of the tire delta. Just confusion from a 7-time world champion about a call that had just cost him a position at his home race. That single sentence says more about Ferrari's in-race decision-making under pressure than any post-race technical report ever could. However, the story wasn't finished there. Because while Hamilton was still absorbing the loss of what looked like a near-certain second-place finish, word came through the paddock that he was being investigated again, and this time it had nothing to do with the false start. This is where things became genuinely tense and genuinely revealing. The infringement centered on a single sector, the run toward turn 10, where a yellow flag had been displayed following an earlier incident. The stewards' findings, once published, revealed something fascinating about the psychology of a driver operating at the absolute edge of his concentration. Hamilton had spent the closing laps locked in a defensive battle with Verstappen, expecting a counterattack at any moment. According to the steward's own reasoning, his attention remained fixed on his mirrors for most of the straight, rather than on the Marshall panels ahead of him, precisely because he was braced for an overtaking move that never fully materialized. When the yellow flag lit up and the green light panel illuminated just before the corner, the stewards concluded that he simply did not make a discernible reduction in speed, and therefore did not fully comply with the requirements of a single waved yellow. That's where the real twist of this whole story lands. A driver who has spent 19 years reading every signal a Formula One circuit can throw at him missed one. Not through recklessness, not through carelessness, but because his own team had already put him in a defensive scramble by conceding position under the safety car. Ferrari's pit wall had forced him to fight for track position rather than manage the situation with a clear head. And that scramble had now nearly cost him a much harsher penalty, one that could have dropped him out of the points entirely on a day when a podium was still within reach. So why does any of this matter beyond one chaotic afternoon in the English countryside? Because it exposes something Ferrari has struggled with all season long, and it is not raw pace. Let's look at the technical picture first, because the car itself deserves real credit here. Ferrari's upgrade package brought to Silverstone was specifically engineered to address the energy deployment problems that hurt them badly back in Austria, where the new power unit regulations, which now draw nearly half of total output from the battery rather than the internal combustion engine, punished any car that couldn't manage its state of charge through long, fast sections. On Sunday, that upgrade clearly worked. The car looked genuinely competitive, arguably the fastest package on the grid for long stretches of the race. Charles Leclerc converted that underlying pace into an actual race win, his first Grand Prix victory since the United States Grand Prix back in October 2024. A drought that had stretched across an entire season and a half. The chassis, in other words, is no longer the problem. Ferrari has closed the gap that everyone assumed would take them years to close. The problem is everything that happens in the moments that require split-second judgment under pressure. A false start committed under the weight of an entire home crowd watching every move. A safety car strategy call that surrendered a hard-fought position without so much as a fight, handed away almost by default. A yellow flag infringement born directly from a driver being forced into defense rather than being allowed to manage the situation with composure. None of these are car problems. They are decision-making problems. They are communication problems between the pit wall and the cockpit. They are exactly the kind of small operational cracks that separate a team capable of winning individual races from a team capable of dominating an entire championship. And Mercedes knows this better than anyone, because they are living proof of the opposite approach. Despite Ferrari's obviously superior pace at Silverstone, Mercedes still leads the Constructors' Championship by 78 points. Antonelli faded out of the points entirely after suffering front wing damage late in the race. Verstappen crashed out with 3 laps still to run. And yet, through all of that turbulence, the value of simply not making costly mistakes carried Mercedes through one of the most turbulent weekends of their season. Consistency beat brilliance. A quietly competent strategy call from the sidelines beat a spectacular pole position and a front-row lockout. That is the lesson sitting underneath every headline from this race weekend, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. That's the uncomfortable truth, buried beneath Hamilton's eventual reprimand. The stewards ultimately allowed him to keep his third-place finish, taking into account the context of his defensive battle and ruling it worthy of a reprimand rather than a harsher time penalty. Ferrari will happily take that result and move on. Leclerc's win. Hamilton's third place. A genuine 1-2 on raw speed against Mercedes' entire operation, delivered in front of a home crowd that had waited years to see it. But results can mask process failures, and Silverstone's process failures were sitting in plain sight for anyone willing to look past the trophy on the top step. Consider, too, what this means looking forward. Verstappen's retirement means Red Bull now watches this title fight largely from the outside, at least for now, while Ferrari and Mercedes trade blows at the very top. That should be Ferrari's opportunity. A car that can win races outright, against a Mercedes package that is clearly not unbeatable on raw pace, in a season where the reigning champions team is dealing with retirements of its own. This is precisely the kind of opening that title-winning teams learn to exploit ruthlessly. It is also precisely the kind of opening that teams still working out their internal communication tend to waste. The championship does not pause to let Ferrari fix any of this quietly behind closed doors in Maranello. The paddock moves straight to Belgium in a matter of days. A circuit with its own demanding mix of changeable weather, tricky strategy windows, and split-second calls under pressure at Eau Rouge and beyond. If Ferrari brings the same competitive car to that weekend, but repeats the same hesitation under pressure, the same confusion in the cockpit, the same conceded positions under a safety car, then Hamilton's home race chaos will not be remembered as a strange one-off incident from a chaotic Sunday. It will be remembered as the exact moment everyone in the sport realized where this entire championship fight is actually going to be decided. Not in the wind tunnel. Not in the simulator. On the pit wall, in real time, when there is no time left to think.